Hello, it's Scott Manley here, back again with another batch of questions from my supporters over at Patreon. This is going to be September's installment. I hope that I can actually do this every month. And we're going to get started with Rajesh King, who asks, I was wondering, when a spacecraft travels at high speed, 1% to 99% of the speed of light, would the interstellar particles bump into the spacecraft so much that it feels like flying in an atmosphere, especially since length contraction and so on and so forth? Would the spacecraft have to be designed with interstellar aerodynamics in mind? Would a nebular ramjet work? Okay, so now actually I got to think about this. So let me see. Okay, so the atmosphere on Earth has a density of about 1 kilogram per cubic meter or thereabouts at sea level. Now, in deep space, I know that we talk about number of particles per cubic centimeter. That's the number I always have in my head. Like in some places, like 1 particle per cubic centimeter in the interstellar medium. And if you go into like some of the more dense nebula, it's up to like 1 million particles per cubic centimeter. So these are like atoms. And that means every cubic meter, we're talking, if you take the densest one, 1 million per cubic centimeter is 1 trillion per cubic meter. So that's 10 to the 12. Avogadro's number is 6 times 10 to the 23. So flip that on its head, and it's you're talking about 10 to the minus 11. But then there's Avogadro's number talks about molar values, so it's actually there's another factor of 3 between grams and kilograms. So yeah, you're talking about a factor of 10 to the 14 difference in atmospheric density between sea level on Earth and the densest parts of deep space. That means speed of light is 3 times 10 to the 8. So between 8 and 14, you've got a factor of 1 million. So even if you're traveling at 99% of the speed of light, the drag is 1 million times less than traveling at like 1 meter per second, right? So it's never going to be an issue. What is going to be an issue at those speeds is that you're going to end up having the particles come in, and they'll be like radiation. Once you go fast enough, those particles are coming in and it's like a radiation flux. And that is going to be more dangerous because the energy coming in is more important than the momentum transfer. Now, there are spacecraft that are concepts like the Bussard ramjet, which the idea is that it has some sort of big magnetic field collector that takes ionized hydrogen in and uses that as reaction mass. I mean, the original idea was you might be able to somehow fuse hydrogen or use that as part of the exhaust or find enough deuterium. I don't know how I don't think this is ever going to work. It's a nice concept in theory. The problem is you can't just take regular hydrogen in the interstellar medium and fuse it because hydrogen is ridiculously hard to fuse. It's something you can only do in a star, and it's the hydrogen rather than deuterium being so hard to fuse is the reason why the sun lives for billions of years instead of burning itself out and exploding really quickly. So anyway, yeah, interesting thing, but no, I don't think it will ever matter. Oh, there was one concept I remember seeing of a spacecraft that could use giant magnetic wings to brake itself against the interstellar medium or actually perform a turn and come around. I'm not sure how viable that is, but it's a cool idea from science fiction. Angry Panda says, confirm or change my mind. To secure life's legacy beyond this planet, humanity will have to invest in significantly either transhumanism, autonomous robotic life forms, or artificial panspermia. He just basically doesn't see human colonies as being truly sustainable for many decades to centuries. Anything useful to do in space is probably more done by probes, etc., etc. Look, I mean, this is a sort of fact that what is humanity, you have to ask. I could totally see people deciding that they want to go out and live elsewhere and spending lots and lots of money to do it, spending more money to do it than they're ever likely to make back in generations. But once humanity has a handhold, a foothold in places, it has demonstrated the ability to adapt. I mean, I've heard people say on the internet, if humans were meant to go to space, they would be built with rockets. It's like, well, if humanity was meant to live in Minnesota, they would have fur, right? Like, I mean, seriously, humanity started out in Africa and has spread throughout the world, and there's been adaptations to all that. And most of the adaptations haven't come from genetic changes. They've come from technological changes where we have learned to wear clothes, right? We've learned to hunt and grow the local, fauna and flora and survive. And yes, I think adaptation is going to include, transhumanism, genetics or whatever. It's going to be one of these things. And I could totally see that there will be humans living throughout the solar system. But if you start to look at, say, going to other stars, I think that is something that you may never see a human going to another star. You might only see robots and AI and, whatever, but they will be children of humanity. And you have to then ask yourself, well, is that humanity? Well, that's a philosophical question. Drew Granston, you picked the best launch footage to share. Thank you. Oh, thank you. A personal question for you, if you don't mind. What type of music do you listen to? Oh, good and easy question. Actually, it's a really hard question. Or specifically, when I do space stuff, do I play any musical instruments? So yes, let's start with music. And my favorite piece of music is always the piece of music I've never listened to. And I'm just like one of these people that just is continuously soaking up new stuff. And whenever anybody comes up with anything that is out of the way in weird ways, like, Mongolian metal bands or just your teen pop, death metal, country, I don't know, as long as it's something I've never heard before, it has a huge attraction to me. My favorite DJ from the past was John Peel, and I still have hundreds of his shows that I've never listened to, and they're always bringing up stuff that I wish I'd heard in the past. I was a DJ for a long time. It was more a club DJ. I would play, high tempo dance music, and I loved it all. And my problem always was that I would be switching styles regularly. As for playing instruments, I mean, obviously, some people would argue that working a mixer and turntables is an instrument, but I've middling skills on ukulele and guitar and have been known to sing badly, but I've always been aspirational in terms of music. I think I have a really good memory for music, and that's really what it comes down to. I just can't sort of live without it. But what do I do when listening to space stuff? I tend to just have the audio on. There is actually, I don't know if it's still out, but Soma FM, they used to do a great ambient music channel. And in the background, they would have Apollo and Space Shuttle communications playing. And it was great for chilling out. And that was Soma FM. I don't know if it still exists, but I think that was pretty cool. Angry Panda, alternate history time. I'm czar of all US space stuff. You know that czar is a Russian term, right? Between the Apollo and Space Shuttle eras, what vehicle do you have to try NASA build? Something like Saturn V, 2.0, space plane shuttle, or with slightly less mission constraints, or some completely different strategy. I mean, I think the problem with Space Shuttle was always that it ended up trying to do everything, and they didn't need a spacecraft to do everything, but they could certainly have used the shuttle launch architecture in many ways. I think ultimately it was determined that it was a mistake to have a booster attached to the side because of damage to the heat shield. Putting a shuttle on top might have worked a lot better, but that would have required a radically different design. I think they should have stuck with Saturn V derived boosters and just learned how to make them faster and more cheaply, or figure out how to recover them. But yeah, more diversity in the launch vehicles. You would have a cargo version of the shuttle that might be disposable. You would have the crew version, which might have a payload bay that wasn't designed for deployment. But being more specific, that's a really hard call to make, because there's a lot to be said for building lots of something very quickly so that you can bring the cost down, and NASA was never in that position to drive the market like that. And of course, the problem was that NASA was losing money as well. Their funding was being heavily cut, but to support the Vietnam War and other things. Kuba says, hello sir, some time ago you've talked about how do robots that would survive on the Venus surface. That got me thinking, would the old way of doing logical gates using magnetic cores be viable in that application? This tech lost to transistors, but maybe would be less susceptible to conditions on the Venusian surface. And I don't actually know, but I do know that magnetic cores do have temperature problems as well. I mean, you have the Curie point, and when you reach that, you can end up with your things being demagnetized. I think any technology that we had previously developed could be adapted to work on Venus. And really it comes down to picking the one that is most easy to fabricate with modern technology. And the fact is, we've had a lot more experience with semiconductors. Therefore, developing new and interesting semiconductors is the way that things will ultimately go. I mean, fact is, you go on YouTube, 10 years ago, I saw people making their own chips, like building their own, just cutting their own masks and making their own transistors and everything. So it's something that can be done at a sort of artisanal, bespoke level. I don't see why you would do something that you had less experience with, unless you had a real valid demonstration that it was going to work better. So I don't know enough about magnetic cores to answer that, but I do think that we might see something one day. But we're not going to see that in the next 2 Venus missions, because neither of them are taking advantage of any of this research. Hi, Scott! Always enjoy learning something from your videos. I have 2 questions. 2 questions. Watching Stowaway got me thinking about Mars cyclers, and finally it dawned on me that surface-to-cycler taxi vehicle just can't fly up to meet the cycler. It must put itself on the same orbit, right? It has to go into an escape trajectory that rendezvous with this thing. Assuming the taxi is just a CSM or similar to the Crew Dragon, how would a rocket be capable? Well, answer is easy. The Falcon Heavy is quite capable of putting a Dragon capsule onto an escape trajectory that will go to Mars. That's totally possible. And we know this because SpaceX were actually proposing something called Red Mars, which would be a Dragon capsule that would actually land on Mars using hypersonic retropropulsion. It would use its aerodynamics to steer its way through the atmosphere and keep itself up until it slowed close to supersonic speeds, and then it would use the Super Draco thrusters to land. SpaceX was seriously proposing this and hoping that NASA would fund it. It never happened, but yeah, we do know that a Falcon Heavy is totally capable of putting a Dragon capsule with crew up to the velocities needed to rendezvous with the cycler. Now, of course, the problem with that is you have to be 100% sure that's going to work, because there's no abort options or anything for this. Second question, what's your favorite combo of pizza toppings? I'm a huge fan of ham and pineapple, but it's going to be a really nicely done pizza. It can't be really thick base. It has to be nice and crispy and crunchy. And, I will totally have peppers and all sorts of other stuff on it, but I love Hawaiian. That's my thing. Okay, skipping down. And we got another question from Andrea Sparini. I've had to be spreading these questions through because he just keeps on asking them. What is the least intuitive idea or concept you have encountered in your life? The one that really puzzled you even if you knew it was true real. I recently lost sleep for a while understanding the machine does directly downwind faster than the wind. Okay, so the thing that I can never figure out is why people get motivated. I mean, this is a psychological thing. Why do people do things out of spite, right? Why do people ruin their own stuff so they can own someone else? Yeah, that doesn't make sense. But that's not a physics thing. What you're looking for is a physics thing, right? Something in science. And psychology, okay, that's science. But there's so many things that I know. Okay, so the thing that a few years ago I did this whole series on nuclear weapons, and basically hydrogen bomb design, modern hydrogen bomb design, just it sort of blows my mind, and I know it must be true, but the idea is that you've got this peanut-shaped cavity, and you might have some sort of device between them, but you've got a fission weapon on one side, and you've got the secondary on the other. And this one explodes and it generates a huge amount of X-ray photons, and they bounce around and they fill this cavity, right? It's a sort of peanut-shaped cavity, and they fill it with a high-pressure photon gas. And that gas squishes the secondary down and heats it and makes it explode. And that is something we know works, and we sort of broadly see the shape of these things, but it just blows my mind that this has to be something that's designed with the notion that everything is breaking and getting destroyed as it's doing its job. So this thing is flying apart, and this casing must be, disintegrating. I mean, it's just the structural strength is not important. It's all about the mass of the material. And then on top of that, for selectable yield weapons, there is some device that will connect the chambers, probably, that will change the flow of photons into this chamber and therefore change the level of compression. This is what I understand from reading various reverse engineering leaked articles. That stuff is just... I just can't figure out how I would even go about beginning to simulate that, and then understanding that people were designing these things largely still using slide rules and paper and stuff in the 1970s. And yeah, the downwind faster than the wind thing wasn't that strange to me because I'd sort of thought about it in the past and realized that, yeah, it was probably possible. Anyway, yeah, huge transition between, land sailing vehicles and nuclear weapons, right? David Hockey. People often talk about the Mach number of an object in space, like Mach 25, speed of sound. Now, okay, so speed of sound varies with temperature and altitude. Why are they doing this? This is what you're asking. And basically, they're asking because they need a simple way to explain to people. Why do I sometimes give speeds in kilometers and miles per hour and other things? Because you want the audience to be able to understand. Why do I always give thrusts in kilograms, right? Or tons? People are like, you should be giving your thrusts in newtons. That's what the laws of physics state, right? Seriously. I totally understand because I was there. I've done physics. I understand what newtons are the correct thing. But many more people understand what a kilogram feels like. And, I think it's okay to use kilograms because von Braun, his writings were all talking about thrusts in kilograms, and that made sense if you're talking about rocket thrusts. So, listen, point is that you might change the units that you're using to express something to make it easy for more people to understand or just to get an idea. Like, when you give a number like 25,000 kilometers per hour, people have hard... it's a big number. You say like, it's like 25 times the speed of sound. I was like, that makes more sense. I mean, smaller numbers are easier for people to track. I think that's a thing. Anyway, going on. Stephen O'Leary. Why isn't NASA or anyone who wants to go to Mars planning an artificial gravity experiment in space? 2 capsule connected by a retractable 100-meter tether rotating about common center of mass. Yeah, okay. Why isn't anyone doing it? People have proposed it many times. There's been multiple proposals for such a mission. NASA hasn't supported any of them because it doesn't see that it feeds into its current long-term plans. But NASA has a limited amount of money and it has to fund the mission proposals that make sense within what it's doing. But there's all these people surrounding it and employed at NASA that are coming up with ideas about how these things could interact, how you could design a mission that would push NASA's state-of-the-art forwards. So these ideas are being proposed. They're just currently not on the critical path to what NASA is tasked with doing, which is Artemis, and then maybe later going to Mars. But it looks like the International Space Station has shown that we can do a pretty good job of keeping people in shape in space for months at a time. Finally, I guess we get time for one more. Daniel Duarte, serious question. Did Gemini, or Gemini as NASA said, actually aimed to go to the moon? I think, was there ever a serious concept of Gemini or Gemini going to the moon? And yes, so it was McDonnell Douglas did the Gemini, and they kept on pushing it. And I think it was a guy at NASA, I don't remember his name, but basically Gemini was Mercury 2. And so, of course, it was the follow-on, and they at that time, it was still being planned when Kennedy was saying, we choose to go to the moon. So one of their proposals was, why don't we put a Gemini on top of a Centaur on top of a Titan and fly it around the moon? And, the math checked out. They could have done it. But this was all around 1961, 1962. And the US was interested in looking in the long term. And also, I believe that the president... there was basically a moment where this keeps on getting proposed over 6 months, and they keep on saying, no, we're doing this. We're doing this Apollo thing instead. But it comes back from time to time, but it was never really considered. Ultimately, it wasn't right. So on the president's side of things, it wasn't really compatible with Lyndon Johnson's idea that bringing more high-tech industry to the south would solve a lot of the social problems. And that's why you get all these big space centers in the south, because Lyndon Johnson felt very strongly that they needed to produce these good tech centers to help with a lot of the social issues that there were. So Apollo tended to fit into that better than McDonnell Douglas' idea of just taking Gemini and continuing to work with it. I mean, there was an idea even as late as 1967 that Gemini could work as a rescue spacecraft for a potential Apollo problem on the moon. And there are plans for that. Again, it was never really seriously considered, but people went out and they did the math. I'm going to have to do it in Kerbal Space Program sometime, right? Anyway, that's, I think, as far as we get for today. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.